Hello everybody, my name is Jayometric. We're going to be looking at CSV files during runtime with Unity. So I have a couple things here on the custom game screen for Grump Wheel. We have custom games folder button. We have a load all CSV files button, a help button which is just instructions, and then we have a drop down where we're able to select the different files. So the open custom games folder button. This will open the file directory where the custom games are. So this is under app data, local low, Jayometric Games, Grump Wheel, Custom. So the specific part in here is I'm adding the custom folder to this. This app data, local low, Jayometric Games were the name of the company or creator, and then the application name is all part of the application.persistent data path. So then we also have a load all CSV button. This is going to load all the options into the dropdown here if you changed any of those at runtime. And then of course we have the actual file itself, which will allow you to select one from the list. Let's take a look at the code. So here we have the file selector, and in here we have the file dropdown, the CSV files list of strings, the file name, the selected file path, the application data path, the custom file path. So what we have here is we're setting the application data path to be the application persistent data path. That's why it's in the app data folder. So this file path is the one that I found worked for me. I tried the application data path, and that did not work for me. So then after that, we're making the custom files path, which is the same location, but then we're adding the word custom. So that's why they were inside of that custom folder. Then the next thing we're doing is trying to load all the CSV files, which in this case, this function also sets the drop-down options. We'll get to that in a moment. So first, we're going to get all the CSV file names and store them in a list of strings. So I want to first clear out the list because this is going to be reused code. Every time you click that button, it's going to get this again, and I don't want the list to keep adding more to it. So clear the list first so you don't have that problem. Then the selected file, I'm setting it to none just to have it cleared out, which I probably don't even need this one because I think I've reused it later on anyway. Then we'll attempt to find all the CSV files. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that our file path exists. So this is where we're checking that custom files path under directory.exist, and I'm using not here. So if it does not exist, we're going to use directory.createDirectory, and it's going to create that folder for us. Then we're going to set the initial value to the list. It's unnecessary to do this if you don't want something in the list, but in my case, this first one is select a custom game. I wanted that to be an instruction for the user, so that's why this is here. And that's why here it says, add these select a custom games. I'm adding that as if it's a CSV file, but it's not. Next, we're going to get a list of all the files inside of the directory by doing directory.getFiles. And we're using that custom file path, and we're only getting files that end with CSV. So in this case, that's the search pattern that we're using. Then we're going to go through each of the files and add their file name to the CSV files, and not their file path. We're adding the file name because those are going to be the drop-down values. So for each file in files, we're going to take that CSV files list, and we're going to add in, from the path, get file name. So that's how we're going to strip off all of the path information and just keep the file name for each file. Then, if the list is 0, there's 0 found, we want to make sure that we're not able to select the drop-down because then there's nothing to select from. I don't want the user to be able to do anything. Then we're going to catch unassigned reference exceptions, so that means access is denied to some directories. And then every other exception, so that means there's an error that occurred and I want it to output the message itself. And the message would tell you what the problem is. Next, we're going to take the CSV files list and we're going to add them as options to the dropdown. So that's the set dropdown options. First, I want to clear out all the options. Like before this is reused, I don't want to keep adding options to the list without removing the old ones first in case they change. It also doesn't matter if they change. Remove that. With dropdowns, you can use add options and you can add in a list of options to add them all at once. Then I'm going to check if the file dropdown has more than one value, since the user instructions always exist in my case. If it did not have any values added, make sure it can't be interacted with. So I'm only making it interactable if there's more than one. And make sure you note here that if your scenario is different, your value for this one here may be different. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the code for once you select the dropdown. In Unity itself, if you select that dropdown, all the way down here, there are the options that have been selected. But in the on value change, we're setting up this. So this is the file selector on CSV selected. So this is what happens when you change the values here. So that's what all this is doing. And on here, On CSV selected, we're checking to make sure that the value is not the first one. So file dropdown.value, that's how we're going to get which one is selected. And we're saying it's not 0, since it's a list, it's starting at 0. So as long as it's not the first one, I'm going to set the file name equal to the file dropdown.options file name dropdown.value. So I'm getting the one that's selected, and then I'm taking the text value from that. So that's where we're getting. Inside of here, this will be 0 here, where the text is this, the select custom game. But we're making sure that it's beyond that. So if they select any one of these three, we'll get this text here. After we get that text, we're going to make sure that we create the file path again. So the selected file path is our custom game path and the file name, since that's going to bring us back to the app data folder inside of the custom folder, and that's where all the files are. So we're building that string back together. And if you selected the first value, I want to make sure there is no file path and there is no selected file. And that's to handle the scenario of you had nothing here, you can't press start, and you picked one. I wanted to make it so that way if you went back to the first one, it was again unselectable. So this next part only pertains to the open file button. So here, open custom file path, we're opening URL. So application.openURL, and I'm giving it a file location. That's how it's opening the folder for you. And then I have load all CSV files, which is just setting the file name, the selected file path to nothing, and getting all the CSV files and setting the options all together. Because I was also calling this from the load all CSV files button. So that way it just handles everything from the one button click without having to add multiple things. It wasn't 100% necessary, but it made it so I only had to add one function to it. So this last one is a little more specific to my needs. I was just getting the number of phrases in a selected file. So in here, I was using file.readAllLines of the file path that was selected, and I'm getting the length. So the length is going to tell you how many lines that one has. Since a CSV file is just going to be, for instance, it's going to be, in my case, it was category, comma, phrase. So each one of those would just be its own line in there. So if there were multiple categories, so let's say there was category 2 and phrase 2, each one of these would just be another line in there. So I wanted to have a way to tell me how many phrases and categories, or how many puzzles, were inside of the game. So using that read all lines is how you can start to read into files. So that's how I'm selecting the different files. Let me bring up an example of how to use that to read in the files. So here's how I'm using this in-game. So to load all of the custom phrases, I'm giving it the file path, which is a player pref, since on the selection screen, once you press start, it saves that file directory as a player pref. So I'm making an array called all lines, and I'm reading in read all lines from the file. So file.readAllLines, and I'm giving it that file path. So that custom file they selected is now being read in. So now I have a debug just to tell me that all of the lines have been read in. Then I'm going to create the phrase list. So this is where I'm actually manipulating the data. So for each string, which I'm calling S, in all lines, which is that array I made earlier, I'm going to make a new phrase. And phrases have two things in my case, category and phrase. So what I'm doing is first, I'm taking the phrase, making a new one. Then I'm taking a new array called splitLine. And I'm splitting that string from all lines, so one of those lines, and I'm making it split with the comma. So because of my files being the category, comma phrase, I'm splitting it with the comma, so I'm getting just category and then just phrase. So then I'm taking p.category, and I'm making that the first one in that array, which is 0, and I'm making the phrase the second one, split line 1. And then I'm adding that phrase, p, to the list of phrases. And then after that's all done, I'm just putting out all of them have been created, here's how many there are. So something else that I wanted to touch on is what happens with different scenarios with the file being open or not created and things like that. So I have this CheckFileExist class, and I am checking this on update. I don't suggest that, but I wasn't quite sure when the player would be updating and manipulating these files. I don't suggest this. I suggest you have it when the menu opens or something like that, but not on update if you can help it. If you absolutely cannot help it, then, well, you have to. So the way this works is to check the file is valid. First, I'm checking to see if there is nothing in the selected file path from the other file. So if there's nothing in the other file, well, I'll just come all the way down here. No file selected. Just make it so you can't press start. Nothing to it. You just haven't picked one. But if you have picked a file, I want to make sure that one's valid. So if the file exists, and I'm checking that file that's selected, That's how we can know, yes, this is a valid file. Then I want to make sure that it has enough, so I need 2 phrases for my game. I'm saying the file selector, if it's less than 2 number of phrases in the file, I want to do something about that. So in this case, I'm making sure if it's greater or equal to 0, because you might have noticed in here in my file selector, I made it so that way there was the option for -1. We'll get to that soon. So in here, if it's 0 or higher, but less than 2, since this is less than 2 and this is greater than 0, I turn on my error box, I set my error message to the player saying that it does not contain 2 phrases, and then I'm setting the max rounds to 1 and the value to 1, because that's this slider here where you get to pick how many rounds you want to play for your game. So it needs to be at least 1. So if there's not enough phrases, I set it to 1 to make sure that they can't pick too many just in case. So then, let's say that it's actually less than 0 with that -1 that I had, because what this does here is it tries to read the file. But then there's an exception, which means the file can't be read. So if this can get through this entire thing, I'm returning a -1. So it tries it can't do anything, it catches the exception, and then it finishes with -1. Otherwise, it's just going to return how many phrases are in the file. So if it can't read all of the lines, either the file doesn't exist, which we already checked for, or the file is already open. So in this case, the file is currently open, please close the file. And if that happens, with this being less than 2, I just turn off the start button. Otherwise, the game can be played because it has more than 2 phrases. So I set the start button interactable, but then I want to make sure if the error box is on, I turn it off because I don't need it there. And I'm setting the number of rounds back to the maximum that it can be. And the else here is for if the file does not exist. So in here, file does not exist. I'm setting it not interactable, I'm setting the error box to true, and I'm saying error not found, was it moved or deleted? And for the last part, no file was selected. So that's how I'm checking all of that. And once again, I am doing it in an update. I would not suggest doing it in an update, but just in case you have to, this is just how I did it. Specific to Android, open custom games folder I'm disabling. This is the code that I'm using to disable it. I'm checking if it's the Android build. So, this code here, application.openurl, does not work because the directory that I'm trying to open, due to Android restrictions, is restricted. So, in order to get around this, you have to connect the phone to a computer, go to the file directory, internal storage, Android, data.com, the name of the company, the name of the application, files, and then from there I'm adding the custom folder. So this file directory before custom is the persistent data path for Android and what you would use for, if you're using this process, reading in a CSV to Android. So that's just some of the ways I use CSV files live during the gameplay for Grumpwheel to make custom games, and I wanted to have some way to document this and maybe help some other people out with their stuff. It might not be perfect, but it's the system I used. So all of the code is up on the GitHub. The link is in the description below. And if you like content like this, please subscribe and follow me for more things on my social media. And I know it wasn't exactly a tutorial, but feel free to ask questions down below. So, until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Have a good one.